At my grandfather's 80-year-old birthday party, a security guard showed me a video that wasn't on the program, and in that instant, the future I thought I had simply vanished. My name is Sarah Miller. After the celebration wound down, I realized I'd left my clutch on my chair, so I went back to the venue to get it. A 2-minute trip, I thought. But as I walked into the main hall, one of the security guards stopped me. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in and whispered for me to follow him to the surveillance office. "What I am about to show you," he said, his voice so grave it sent a shiver down my arms, "is going to change everything you think you know." And he wasn't wrong. I actually collapsed right there on the floor. He pressed play on the footage from the camera positioned directly above our family's table. I watched the scene unfold with sickening clarity. The moment I stood up and turned my back to raise my glass for Grandpa George's toast, someone I trusted implicitly pulled a tiny vial from their pocket and tipped a clear liquid into my glass of water. Another family member moved to casually block the view, while a third person scanned the room before giving a subtle nod of confirmation. Then they exchanged a small, conspiratorial smile, the kind of smile I'd always mistaken for warmth and affection. As I turned back to the table, completely oblivious, and took a long drink from the glass, my hands started to tremble so violently on the surveillance room desk that I had to grip the edge just to keep myself steady. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me, and my mind just went utterly blank. The guard, Mike, quietly asked if I was all right, if he should call someone for me. I could only manage to shake my head, no words coming out, just silent tears streaming down my face. The people who were supposed to be my world, my bedrock, had done this to me in a room full of people, and I had swallowed their poison without a second thought. Where in the world are you listening to this story from? Let me know in the comments below with your location, and tell me, have you ever had that gut-wrenching moment where you realize the people you trust the most, the very ones who raised you, were secretly trying to tear you down? If you found yourself in my shoes, at a family party no less, what would be the very first thing you would do? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Share them down there. I drove home that night in a complete daze, the Boston city lights smearing into blurry streaks past my car window as my brain replayed the video on an endless, torturous loop. By the time I pulled into the long, winding driveway of our family estate just outside the city, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. I went straight to my private office on the second floor, the one space in that enormous house that had ever felt truly mine, and I collapsed into the worn leather chair behind my mahogany desk. Sitting there, in the faint glow of my desk lamp, I let my mind drift back, thinking about how I had poured every ounce of myself into Miller Legacy Properties for years. Grandpa George had started to trust me with major projects when I was in my late 20s, giving me the kind of complex deals no one else in the family wanted to touch. I specifically remembered one deal from about 5 years ago, a crucial downtown property that was snarled in a disastrous old contract. It was a mess that was threatening to cost the company a flat $25 million. I flew out to negotiate in person with the sellers, spent nights poring over every single clause, and managed to turn the entire situation around by myself. When the deal finally closed in our favor, Grandpa George pulled me aside in front of the whole executive board, clapped me on the shoulder, and declared loudly that I was the only one in the family with the foresight to see it through. That felt like true validation, the kind of recognition that made all the sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends feel worthwhile. But my parents, Robert and Susan, along with my brother Jason, were always lingering on the periphery. They would offer these thin, polite smiles before quickly changing the subject. My father would say something like, "Sarah did a solid job on that one, but for a woman to lead long-term in this industry, it's a tough road, you know." My mother would then chime in, smooth as silk, "Jason is picking things up so fast. He will be ready to step in and help provide some stability soon." And Jason, he would just nod along, a passive participant who rarely did any of the actual heavy lifting. Yet my parents always leaped to his defense whenever Grandpa George asked for an update on his contributions to the company. I used to dismiss it, telling myself they were just trying to be fair parents, making sure neither of their children felt overlooked. But looking back at it now, through the lens of that horrific video, it all felt so different. It wasn't about fairness. It was a slow, deliberate campaign to erase my accomplishments. They treated my successes as if they were just temporary fixes, because in their minds, a daughter could never be the one to permanently hold the reins. I leaned my head back against the chair, my eyes tracing the framed photos on my office wall. There I was, shaking hands at closing ceremonies, Grandpa George and I reviewing blueprints late into the night. All those moments had felt so real, so unbreakable. But the way my family consistently downplayed them, always redirecting any praise toward a vague future, where Jason would naturally take over, it started to make a horrible kind of sense. They had positioned me as the capable but temporary leader, the one who could fix the problems until the true heir, their son, was ready. I thought of all those board meetings where I'd presented growth strategies that had doubled our portfolio's value in key sectors. The response was always the same: lukewarm approval, followed by comments about how exhausting it all must be for me. I had proven myself with hard data, with revenue spikes under my direct oversight, with risks I'd averted that saved millions more than just that one big deal. Properties we acquired became profitable in record time because of decisions I championed, often against their subtle resistance. But none of it ever seemed to register with them. It was always framed as me being helpful or supportive, never as genuine leadership. The more I thought, the clearer the ugly pattern became. Family dinners where Grandpa would boast about my latest achievement, only for my mother to pivot the conversation to Jason's golf game or some trivial networking event he'd attended. My father would nod in agreement, reinforcing the narrative that the business needed someone who could commit without the added pressures that women supposedly face. Even Megan, Jason's wife, would chime in with little remarks about how nice it would be when things settled down and everyone could relax a bit more. I'd always just laughed it off, assuming it was just their old-fashioned thinking, something that would eventually fade as I continued to prove my worth. After all, Grandpa George saw it. He'd said it himself many times. But now, sitting alone in my office, a deeper, colder doubt began to creep in. If they truly believed I was just a placeholder because of my gender, what else were they willing to do to ensure their version of the future came to pass? I got up and began to pace the room, stopping at the large window that overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens. The estate had been in our family for generations, a symbol of everything we had built in Boston's cutthroat real estate market. I had fought to expand our legacy responsibly, focusing on sustainable developments that aligned with modern values. Those efforts had paid off in ways that went beyond the numbers, earning us a reputation that opened doors to partnerships our competitors could only dream of. Yet here I was, questioning if my own family saw any of that as real or permanent. The betrayal captured in that footage wasn't just about the act of poisoning. It was the crushing realization that my contributions had been systematically undermined from the very beginning, dismissed long before I even knew there was a battle to be fought. By the time I finally switched off the lamp and went to my room, a mix of sheer exhaustion and cold resolve had settled over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I couldn't let them rewrite my role in this family's legacy any longer. A couple of days later, I forced myself to move past the shock and take action. I wasn't going to be paralyzed by this. I reached out to a private laboratory in downtown Boston that I'd used before for environmental testing on potential property acquisitions. They were known for their discretion with sensitive corporate matters and asked no questions. That afternoon, I drove there myself. I had sealed the remaining water from the party in a sterile container I'd picked up from a medical supply shop on the way, along with a fresh blood sample I'd had drawn at a nearby urgent care clinic. When I arrived at the lab, I handed the samples over in person, emphasizing the need for an urgent analysis, but keeping my explanation vague, just a potential contamination from an event, nothing more. The lab technician gave me a professional nod, promising to send preliminary findings as soon as possible. The waiting was absolute torture. The first email update came 4 days later, and it only made my anxiety worse. They had isolated unusual chemical traces in the water, but they couldn't definitively identify the compound without more data to compare it to. It didn't match anything in their standard databases for common poisons or contaminants. For an accurate identification, they needed more material to cross-reference. I couldn't stand the thought of delays, so I took a risk and went back to the venue that same night. I sent a message directly to Mike Thompson, the security guard. He had slipped me his personal number during our first meeting, seeming to sense that I would need his help again. He agreed to meet me after hours at a discreet service entrance at the back of the building. The venue was mostly dark and silent, the vast halls echoing with the distant hum of a floor polisher as he led me to a storage area. He had thoughtfully set aside one of the actual water glasses from our table, unwashed and sealed in a bag. He explained that he'd held onto it because something about that night had just felt deeply wrong to him. We also downloaded longer video clips from a secondary camera angle, which provided more context around the table's activity. My nerves were completely shot the entire time. At one point, a janitor's cart rolled by too close, and I had to duck into the shadows, holding my breath until it passed. After I got the enhanced samples, I delivered them to the lab first thing the next morning. The full report came back, and it confirmed my worst fears. It was a specialized neurocompound, a chemical restricted to research environments, engineered to cause temporary cognitive impairment. It was designed to slowly erode concentration, short-term memory, and sound judgment, all while mimicking a natural decline from stress or age. The report noted that stopping exposure would allow for recovery, but prolonged use could make someone appear consistently incompetent in a high-stakes professional setting. The lab also stated that its non-medical application was a violation of federal laws on incapacitating agents and could fall under assault statutes if used with malicious intent. To connect it directly to the source, I needed to find physical evidence inside our home. I waited for my chance. The family had their regular golf retreat scheduled for the upcoming weekend at a club in the Berkshires, about 2 hours west, plenty of time for the estate to be empty. On Saturday morning, as soon as their cars were out of the driveway, I went straight to Jason's private study on the first floor. Using a duplicate key I'd kept from years ago when I helped him organize his files, I gently unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. My heart was pounding in my ears as I carefully sifted through his papers. And there it was, detailed statements from multiple Las Vegas casinos, overdue markers adding up to a staggering $2.5 million, complete with threatening letters warning of escalating interest and collection actions. Tucked behind them, in a hidden false bottom, was the matching vial. It was a small, unmarked glass bottle with a dropper top and a visible residue at the bottom that matched the lab's description. I photographed every single page, making sure to capture the account numbers, dates, and signatures for irrefutable proof. The whole process took much longer than I'd anticipated. My fingers were trembling so much I was worried the photos on my phone would be blurry. A sense of paranoia grew with every creak of the old house. I had just finished when I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway outside. They were back, hours earlier than they were supposed to be. I locked the drawer exactly as I'd found it, slipped the key back into my pocket, and hurried out through a side hall to my own wing upstairs. Just as I reached my door, I heard their voices from the foyer downstairs. They'd cut the trip short for some reason. I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady myself, flooded with relief but shaken by how close I'd come to being caught. The evidence was finally mine, solid, undeniable, and it linked the substance directly to Jason's desperation. For the next week, I was a wreck. I hid the encrypted drive with all the evidence in a locked safe behind a row of books in my office. Sleep was almost impossible. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every family dinner, every dismissive comment, every fake smile, and wondering how I had missed it all. The thought of exposing them terrified me. It wasn't just about shattering the perfect family image we had projected for decades. It was about Grandpa George. His health was fragile at 80, and a betrayal this profound from his own son and daughter-in-law might be more than he could handle. But the alternative, staying silent, meant giving up everything I had fought for. It meant letting them win and allowing them to paint me as a failure. The conflict was tearing me apart, leaving me perpetually exhausted and irritable, even during simple routine meetings. I finally decided I had to know where my mother truly stood. I held on to a sliver of hope that her maternal instinct might win out over her loyalty to tradition. I suggested we meet for coffee at our usual spot near Boston Common, just a short drive from the estate, telling her I needed some advice about the pressure at work. She agreed, and we sat at a quiet outdoor table on a weekday morning. I started off gently, mentioning how I'd been feeling off lately, and asked if she had noticed anything different about me. Then I carefully steered the conversation, saying I suspected someone close to us didn't want me to lead the company anymore. My mother looked at me for a long, quiet moment over her coffee cup. Her expression softened, and for a second I thought she might actually confess. But then she sighed and set her cup down. "Sarah, you're a woman running a massive operation. It's demanding. It wears people down over time. Grandpa will understand eventually. Putting Jason in charge is simply better for the long-term stability of the family." My stomach plummeted. Still, I had to push. "Do you really think I'm not strong enough? After everything I've proven?" She gave me a sad little smile and reached across the table to pat my hand. "It's not about strength, sweetheart. Our family has always passed leadership down to the sons. It's how we've stayed strong for generations." She didn't admit to anything directly. She didn't even flinch when I hinted at foul play. But her eyes darted away whenever I held her gaze for too long. Her avoidance was as clear as a confession. She was protecting the plan. She had chosen the so-called legacy over her own daughter. Our conversation ended politely. We made small talk about the weather and some upcoming charity event, but on the inside, I was shattered. Driving back, the city traffic was just a blur. The weight of it all settled on me. My mother had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That afternoon, I walked alone through the estate's gardens, trying to absorb the final confirmation that a blood connection meant nothing without loyalty. I had always believed her support was real, even if it came with those subtle, sexist caveats about a woman's role in business. Now, every one of her past comments replayed in my head with a sinister new meaning. How she would praise my deals but immediately follow up with concerns about my burnout, or suggest I needed more balance, which always coincidentally aligned with the idea of me stepping aside. The pain wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deep, profound ache of loss, the realization that the mother-daughter bond I had always counted on had boundaries, and those boundaries were defined by outdated, patriarchal expectations. I sat on a bench overlooking the view of the lake our property bordered, letting the silence sink in as I reevaluated my options. If I went public with the evidence, it would destroy more than just reputations. It would obliterate the illusion of family unity we had carefully projected to our partners and competitors for years. As evening fell, the internal war raged on. I reviewed the files on my laptop again, the cold clinical language of the lab reports a stark contrast to the personal devastation they represented. I thought about my grandfather, how he had built the firm from nothing after moving to Boston in his 20s, fighting through recessions that had destroyed other developers. He had chosen me because he saw that same fight in me, not because of my gender, but in spite of the industry's biases. Letting this scheme succeed would be the ultimate betrayal of his trust. but confronting it meant I had to accept that my parents valued an abstract tradition more than their own child's well-being and success. The nights that week blurred into one another. I skipped meals and kept my conversations with the staff to a minimum to hide my distraction. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if Megan knew too, or if Jason had confided in anyone else. The turning point came midweek. I overheard part of a phone call drifting from my father's study, something about finalizing the details with Mark before the announcement party. I couldn't record it clearly, but the confident tone confirmed they were moving ahead, certain that my apparent decline would seal their victory. That little snippet of conversation hardened something inside me. The doubt was still there, and the hurt hadn't vanished, but my fear shifted. Losing the company I had helped build would be painful, but losing myself to their gaslighting and manipulation would be far worse. My mother's words echoed in my mind, not as a comfort, but as the final push I needed. She had chosen her side, and that forced me to definitively choose mine. With the inheritance party just weeks away, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I contacted David Henderson, Grandpa George's oldest and most trusted friend, the one man who had been there since the very beginning of the company. I met him in his private office after hours, a quiet, reassuring space filled with old blueprints and photos from their earliest projects together. I laid all the evidence out on his wide desk, the complete lab report, the photos from Jason's desk, the audio files. I watched his expression shift from deep concern to pure, cold fury as he pieced it all together. He didn't waste a second on doubt. He just put a firm hand on my shoulder and said, "We will protect the foundation of everything George built. No exceptions." The challenges began almost immediately. When we tried to move the company's critical documents, the original property deeds, founding share certificates, and primary contracts, we found they were scattered across multiple secure locations, including the family's main bank, which had strict protocols for monitoring any unusual activity. We couldn't risk large transfers that would trigger an alert to my father or the board, so we broke the work down into small, careful steps over several evenings. We drove to different branches all around the Boston metro area, scanning and uploading documents in batches before physically relocating the originals to a neutral international facility that David had access to through his long-standing overseas connections. We had one very close call at a suburban branch when a manager recognized David from past business and started asking pointed questions about the reorganization. We managed to deflect with some vague talk about routine estate planning, but the encounter left us both on edge for days. At the same time, David connected me with a specialist physician he knew through discreet channels, someone experienced in treating exposure to restricted neurocompounds. The treatment protocol started immediately, but the recovery was anything but smooth. In the early stages, I suffered from severe vertigo that often left me bedridden for hours, unable to stand without the entire world spinning violently. The migraines were relentless, and a crushing fatigue would hit me in waves, making even simple tasks like reading an email feel like climbing a mountain. I coped by staying in my room as much as possible, telling everyone that the pressure of the upcoming party was finally getting to me. The doctor adjusted my dosages carefully, warning me that pushing the treatment too fast could actually make the symptoms worse for a time. The deception became harder to maintain as my condition fluctuated. Jason was the first to notice the inconsistencies. He cornered me in the kitchen one morning, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You're moving around a lot better lately," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Feeling stronger?" I brushed it off, complaining about having sporadic good days, but he pressed me again a few evenings later during dinner. My father soon joined in the scrutiny, studying me from across the table during our shortened strategy meetings, before commenting that the leadership load might be too much for me right now. "Are you sure you want to keep pushing this hard, Sarah?" he would ask, his eyes lingering on me. I had to lean into the performance, intentionally trailing off mid-sentence during discussions or resting my head in my hands to simulate complete exhaustion. Grandpa George's worry grew deeper with every report my parents fed him about my struggles. They ramped up their private conversations with him, emphasizing the urgent need for decisive action to protect the company. He would pull me aside in the library for these quiet, heartfelt check-ins, holding my hands and searching my face. "Are you really okay with all this responsibility right now?" he'd ask softly. "I never want to burden you if it's too much." The guilt of keeping him in the dark was a constant ache, knowing the full truth would devastate him, but revealing it too soon would risk everything David and I had worked to secure. I had to keep reassuring him that I was managing, all while the conflict raged inside me. The risks kept mounting. A scheduled bank audit nearly coincided with one of our document transfers, forcing a frantic, last-minute cancellation. My symptoms swung wildly. I'd have bursts of clarity, strong enough to sharply critique complex financial projections, only for a wave of nausea to strike in the middle of a conversation. I learned to time my moments of weakness for when my family was present, slouching in my chair or excusing myself early from meals. My mother watched me silently most of the time, her expression completely unreadable since our conversation over coffee. The atmosphere in the house grew thick and tense, with everyone orbiting the approaching party, each with their own secret expectations. The day of the inheritance announcement party finally arrived, filling our family estate with a tense mixture of excitement and unspoken agendas. Over 100 guests flowed in throughout the afternoon. Veteran developers who had partnered with Grandpa on landmark Boston projects, the attorneys who managed our trusts, bankers tied to our financing, and a host of extended relatives who only ever showed up for major events. The grand ballroom was transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in fine linen. Fresh orchids had been flown in from a conservatory, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Servers moved through the crowd with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while conversations hummed with talk of recent commercial leases and downtown revitalization projects. I made my way through the room, carefully greeting old acquaintances. I intentionally let my hand waver slightly as I held my glass, spilling a drop or two to sell the narrative of my ongoing decline. When I approached a group of executives I'd worked closely with on our big Seaport District expansion, I deliberately paused as if searching for a word, then asked one of the vice presidents to repeat his name, even though we had met dozens of times. They all responded with polite, worried concern, patting my arm and suggesting I find a seat. The act was draining, but it was a necessary final touch to reinforce the story my parents had been peddling for months. I had sent Mark Sullivan a personal invitation, framing it as an olive branch and mentioning Grandpa's desire to move past old rivalries. He showed up right on time, dressed impeccably, and immediately started working the room with firm handshakes and nostalgic stories about deals from 20 years ago. I watched him from across the ballroom, and we exchanged a brief, knowing nod when our eyes met. I kept my distance, waiting for the right moment. Several times during the evening, I slipped away to double-check our preparations. The encrypted USB drive was secure in a hidden inner pocket of my clutch, loaded with everything: the extended surveillance footage from Mike, the audio files of my family's planning sessions, the complete lab breakdown of the neuro compound, and the high-resolution images of the vial in Jason's massive casino debts. The independent technician I had hired, someone recommended by a trusted contact, completely outside our family circles, confirmed he was in position at the main control station, ready to trigger the presentation on my discreet signal from a tiny remote I held in my hand. My parents and Jason remained clustered around Grandpa George at the elevated head table, their body language screaming their intentions. My mother leaned in constantly, placing gentle proprietary touches on his arm. My father gestured emphatically as he spoke about future stability, while Jason sat forward in his chair, practically vibrating with eagerness, occasionally glancing my way with a look of pure, smug satisfaction. Megan sat by his side, offering supportive smiles to the conspirators. I caught snippets of their conversation as I passed by, phrases like protecting legacy assets and ensuring smooth continuity, all perfectly aligned with their secret plot. Grandpa's gaze kept finding me in the crowd, his eyes a mixture of pride in the grand event and deep worry over my visible fatigue. During a brief lull, he beckoned me over. He took my hand in both of his grip still surprisingly strong. "How are you holding up tonight?" he asked softly, his eyes scanning my face with that sharp, penetrating look he always had. I managed a weak nod and a quiet reassurance that I was fine, even as a surge of adrenaline shot through me. The sequence was about to begin. As dinner service concluded, guests began moving to their assigned seats. The clinking of silverware quieted, and a sense of anticipation settled over the room. Everyone knew what was coming. Grandpa's long-awaited announcement of succession. The MC took the stage, welcoming everyone and sharing a few lighthearted anecdotes about Grandpa's early days. The room rippled with polite laughter as glasses were raised. I'd positioned myself near an aisle close enough to the stage to intervene quickly without drawing attention. Mark Sullivan was still mingling, oblivious, discussing a potential joint venture with another developer. The energy in the room shifted as dessert plates were cleared. Conversations dropped to a whisper and all eyes turned forward. Grandpa rose slowly to a wave of warm applause, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. He spoke of his gratitude for partnerships that spanned decades, crediting specific people in the audience for their contributions. My parents stood on either side of him like supportive pillars, while Jason shifted in his seat, his expectation almost palpable. The build-up felt like an eternity, every word amplifying the stakes, as Grandpa prepared to reveal the future of the firm he had poured his life into. The hall fell completely silent as Grandpa George rose to speak, the clink of silverware ceasing as every eye in the room turned to the head table. He took the microphone, his voice carrying its familiar weight and authority despite a slight tremor. He was ready to announce his successor. Just before he could speak the name, I stood up. "Grandpa," I said, my voice intentionally soft and a little unsteady. "If it's all right, I'd like to say a few words of thanks to the family first." I gave him a faint smile, and as his eyes met mine, I gave the subtle signal to the technician. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. The extended footage began to play in high definition, showing the exact moment from the birthday party. Mike Thompson's recorded voice filled the silent room. "What I am about to show you is going to change everything you think you know." The room froze. The clip showed my father, Robert, keeping watch, my mother, Susan, blocking the view, and my brother, Jason, carefully adding the substance from the vial to my water. Next came the audio recordings of their planning sessions, their voices crystal clear as they discussed selling off prime company assets at a steep discount to Mark Sullivan after they had successfully made me appear unfit to lead. The lab report followed, slide after slide detailing the restricted chemicals' effects on cognition. Finally, the photographs appeared. The remaining vial found in Jason's desk, and the statements of his $2.5 million gambling debts, complete with overdue notices. An absolute suffocating silence descended on the room. It felt like no one dared to breathe. Grandpa stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He turned slowly to my parents and Jason. His voice was rough, broken, as he asked just one question: "Is this true?" No one answered. My mother bowed her head, refusing to meet his gaze. My father stammered something incoherent about a misunderstanding. Jason had gone completely pale, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. The guests began to shift uncomfortably, and whispers erupted in the back rows as the reality of what they were seeing spread through the room. I turned to face them directly, my voice now steady and clear. "You did this to me," I said, "because you believed a daughter couldn't lead. that only a son deserved to carry on the family name. Near the front, Mark Sullivan shot up from his seat, knocking over a glass as he tried to scramble for the exit. But the security personnel I had discreetly stationed at the doors blocked his path. At that moment, the police officers I had arranged to be on standby entered from the side. They moved with quiet efficiency through the stunned crowd. They read them their rights, the words echoing in the silent ballroom: conspiracy to defraud, attempted harm. First to my father, then my mother, then Jason, and finally Mark, cuffing each one of them as the Miranda rights were recited. The whispers turned to audible gasps. Phones came out despite the no recording signs posted at the entrance. Some of Grandpa's oldest partners looked away, embarrassed and horrified. Others just stared in open-mouthed shock as our family imploded right in front of them. Grandpa George sank back into his chair, one hand clutching his chest while the other gripped the edge of the table. His eyes were locked on me, filled with a mixture of agony and profound regret. I stood there through it all. No tears came, just a hollow, empty feeling as I watched the people who had raised me being led out in handcuffs past tables of their horrified friends and colleagues. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. The only sounds left were the footsteps of the officers and the muffled, pathetic protests of my family. Megan sat frozen next to Jason's empty chair, her face buried in her hands. As the four of them were escorted out to the waiting cars, the flashbulbs of a few media contacts I had anonymously tipped off lit up the scene through the windows. Inside, conversations erupted in low, urgent tones. People wondered what this meant for ongoing deals, for the company's stability. Sympathy was directed my way from those of my grandfather's generation. I remained near the podium, watching the reality sink in for everyone. The betrayal was no longer a private matter. It was public, undeniable, and the consequences were unfolding in real time, under the bright lights of the ballroom. When I moved closer to him, Grandpa reached for my hand, squeezing it weakly. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were pleading, asking for an explanation I couldn't give him just yet. The evening that was meant to celebrate a legacy had become the night it broke. Alliances were already shifting in hushed tones all around us as the full weight of the evidence hung in the air like smoke. The staff began to clear the tables quietly, sensing the event was over in every way that mattered. A few partners approached hesitantly, offering support or asking discreet questions about our next steps, but I deflected them gently. My only focus was on my grandfather. The drive home later would be silent, the grand estate feeling larger and colder than ever. But in that moment, standing in the ruins of my family, the emptiness began to give way to a strange, hard-won clarity. I had protected what truly mattered, even if it had cost me everything else. 10 months later, the dust had finally settled, and the legal outcomes were clear and final from the federal court in Boston. My parents, Robert and Susan, each received an 8-year sentence for conspiracy to defraud and attempted harm. The judge cited the calculated, premeditated nature of their actions over many months. Jason drew a 10-year sentence. The additional time was for his direct role in administering the substance, plus separate charges for the financial fraud tied to his concealed gambling debts. Mark Sullivan's company completely collapsed under the weight of the investigation. His shareholders pulled out, contracts were canceled, and regulators permanently shut down his firm after uncovering a web of related unethical practices. Grandpa George made it through the immediate aftermath, though the shock took a visible toll on his strength. For weeks, he was quieter than I had ever seen him, dutifully attending his follow-up medical appointments, but he refused to stay away from the office completely. A few days each week, he would come in for a few hours, sitting in the conference room and reviewing the summaries I prepared for him. He offered insights from his decades of experience, but never once brought up the trial or the people involved. We developed a new routine, spending quiet mornings going over expansion proposals. His steady presence was a constant reminder of why the company had endured in the first place. I assumed full and formal control of Miller Legacy Properties, restructuring the teams to focus on long-term, sustainable projects across Massachusetts and New England. We closed several major deals for eco-friendly commercial developments in growing suburban areas, bringing in revenue growth that significantly outpaced previous years. The partners who had stood by us through the scandal expressed their relief at the new direction. New investors, who were cautious at first, committed fully once they saw the results. The daily operations of the company ran more smoothly than they had in years, free from the underlying tensions that had poisoned it for so long. Every morning, I would walk into the main boardroom on the top floor of our downtown headquarters and take a moment to adjust the framed photographs on the credenza. I had added a large print of Grandpa George in his 40s, standing proudly on the site of his very first major acquisition, a vacant lot that would become our flagship property. Next to it, I hung the photo from 5 years ago of me signing the turnaround agreement that saved the company $25 million. Those two images side by side captured the true continuity of the firm. I had every other family photo, the ones that included Robert, Susan, or Jason, removed. I replaced them with pictures of team achievements and project renderings. Megan finalized her divorce from Jason quickly after the arrests and moved out of state, cutting all ties as far as anyone knew. The estate felt different, too. The constant comings and goings I'd grown up with were gone. The hallways were quieter, and there were fewer voices at the dinner table when Grandpa joined me. We adapted to our new normal, our conversations focused on market trends and zoning hearings instead of the past. The staff's loyalty shifted, firmly aligning with the leadership that had steered the company through the crisis. Looking back on it all now, the experience taught me something fundamental about what truly holds a legacy together. A blood relation is no guarantee of shared values or trust. Sometimes it just masks the exact opposite. True inheritance isn't something that's passed down automatically through birth order or gender. It's earned through integrity, through hard work, and through the choices you make when you think no one is watching. Grandpa and I rebuilt something stronger because we chose to prioritize those principles over empty sentiment. The company is thriving today, not in spite of what happened, but because we refuse to let betrayal define its future. Family, in the end, is about who shows up for you with honesty and unwavering commitment. End of story.